this is Scottish Independence podcast number 96, and this is the first interview since the referendum, though it's not the first episode. I was delighted to have back on Colin Fox, who is a former member of the Scottish Parliament and is the national co-spokesperson of the Scottish Socialist Party, which is harder to say than you think it might be. We had a chat about what the Yes campaign achieved and what it will achieve in the future, and about some of the things that have gone on since, for good and for bad. As ever with Colin, it was pretty good fun, so we'll just go straight to the conversation and I'll have a wee word with you at the end. Hi Colin, how's it going?
I'm great, thank you. Yeah, I'm thriving.
Yeah, it's still hurting a bit much for me actually, although it's not like there's nothing happened in the meantime. We're about to lose all our human rights apparently. That was a good outcome of a no vote.
Yeah, you know, the Tories, they try to ingratiate themselves upon us, threatening to take away our human rights, but we're fortunate. We live in a country where human rights legislation's already devolved to the Scottish Parliament, so we'll not be importing any of that nonsense here. I look forward to people coming to this country because we've maintained human rights and we have respect for human dignity, so Cameron wants to get rid of it. That's up to him. We aspire to higher human endeavour and higher human rights and liberties.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of the things that's been happening. There's been 100 things since the referendum. We've got another war in Iraq. We've got the miraculous discovery of more oil in the North Sea that apparently didn't exist before the referendum but suddenly exists now, even though they've been saying it in the oil trade papers since about June. I mean, what do you make of some of these things that have been going on?
Well, my prediction is you're going to see more and more of this now, aren't you? All the good news that was subverted and suppressed the last year is going to come out, probably like torrents, and show you that, Scotland is that rich, wee northern European country that the Yes campaign said it was throughout. You know, so all this information is now from the No campaign and from the British state's perspective safe to release into a debate that they think that they've won, you know. So funny thing is, I would have said to you, Michael, that the heads would have been down, people have been demoralised, that, you know, we lost the referendum, etc. But this country continues to surprise even hardened activists like me, you know. 60,000 people have joined the three independence parties in the last 10 days. What's happening to Scotland? This isn't the Scotland I knew. It's a far better place.
That's what I was going to ask you. How's the SSP membership?
It's fantastic, fantastic. I mean, I can tell you exclusively, see, after the referendum on the Thursday, we were completely skint. We didn't have a penny piece to our name. We'd spent all the money. And then what happens? 2,500 people applied to join the SSP in 4 days. And the socialist movement in the whole British Isles, that's never happened before. No party's put on 2,500 new members in 4 days. And for us, what did it mean? It meant that we had to run up to Staples, buy thousands of envelopes, we had to run to the post office and put £1,700 on my credit card in order to send back membership packs to the people. So somebody said, I think we'll have to rob a post office and steal other stamps. So it's been fabulous for us. I mean, on the one hand, I was that naive individual who thought that when the referendum was over, I'd get a bit of a rest for a week. In actual fact, the 10 days after the referendum, I've been busier than any time in the last 2 years, but it's a good busy. It's a great busy. 2,500 people. I plan to join the Scottish Socialist Party. Fantastic people, every one of them, and we're doing our best to make sure they get the customer care they deserve in joining the Scottish Socialist Party. So it's terrific.
Yeah, I hope it's only a privatised post office you're robbing and not a publicly owned one. But no, just in the light of that, you know, you're saying 2,500 new SSP members. The Greens have had a big jump, and the SNP coming up with an extraordinary explosion.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you think of the prospects for this Yes Alliance that people are talking about, the 45 plus or whatever? It looks like there really could be a movement, but there needs to be a bit of direction now as well. I mean, where do you think we stand with this?
Absolutely, direction's really important. But I tell you what, you know how politicians always like to say, yeah, I knew that would happen, I predicted that would happen, right? I can safely say that neither the Greens nor the SNP or the Scottish Socialist Party anticipated those 60,000 members applying. We never seen it coming yet. I spoke to Patrick and Nicola at the Yes Scotland Advisory Board on Monday, and they were saying exactly the same thing. Never seen it come. It was straight out of clear blue sky. We were expecting, you know, the heads to be down, so it's been fantastic. And so what we now face is, what do we do to keep this pot simmering? What's the tactics we employ to keep together the most successful grassroots political movement this country's ever seen? So we're talking about what approach and tactics we take in next year's Westminster elections so that these constituencies that have a Labour MP in particular who did so much to organise a no vote and yet find that a majority of their constituents a week past on Thursday voted yes, they're coating a shaky nail. So we're looking at the idea of putting up Independence Alliance candidates next year so that we can keep the pot boiling and we can have more independent support MPs at Westminster. So it's early days, but I think that's a terrific prospect and something that really excites and exhilarates us as looking to what we can achieve next.
Do you think there's likely to be some kind of, because I know that Robin McAlpine with the Commonweal and there's other people working on different things, when the dust all settles a bit, we need to come out of this with a clear set of goals. And also, I once spoke with a guy who was a top military guy at a conference, and not that I'm a particularly pro-military man.
Was he from North Korea?
No, he wasn't. But he said something interesting. He said, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And I think maybe should we be working out right, not only a clear set of goals, but how we go from A to B to C here. And I think these things need, when the dust settles a bit, we need to come out in the next few months quickly, I suppose, with some clear laid out plans, not only in terms of here's what we want, A, B, and C, but also here's what we're going to do to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, sometimes with military men, they also talk gibberish, do you know what I mean? They talk a language that doesn't make any sense, especially when they're talking about what great things their weapons can do and their missile systems and that. But no, you're absolutely right. I think there's a great goodwill and a real strong desire right across the independence movement to continue to at local level, right across the place, to say we've got something really potent here that's absolutely profound. And with all, I know you've made the point quite rightly that the dust will settle. There'll be other demands in our time, whether it's bombing in Iraq or austerity or the prospect of stopping a Tory government that can push independence down the agenda a little from where it is just now. But since independence is still the key to a lot of the things that we want to see changed, then I think it's in everybody's interest who's part of Yes Scotland to see how we can consciously and consistently use the arguments that we used over the last 2 years in the Westminster general election. How, for example, a big question is, okay, we lost that referendum, we respect the result, but how do we achieve independence? What's the timescale for independence? You know, Jim Sillars, I'm sure you've spoken to him before, and he talks about the 2016 Holyrood elections being the independence elections. We get a majority then we get independence. So there's lots of ferment ideas, lots of great ideas out there that need time and discussion, and you know, it's not just a question of logistics, it's a question of ideas probably at this stage.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of the attempts are at least one sort of defining idea at the moment is something that a lot of people are mentioning on social media as well, is like working very hard to get some Labour people out. And one of the main features since the referendum has been a very clear anger toward the Labour Party. How do you feel about that?
I think insofar as we're able to say the three parties, the three independence parties, all those people have applied to join, I think a huge proportion of them, probably even a majority, are previous Labour voters who are furious that they voted yes, but the Labour Party was not just voting no, but was at the leadership of the no campaign. That, I think that's an enormous percentage of these 60,000 coming from that point of view. Now, the one thing we all have to recognise, you and me have been round the block. I remember I was standing against Alistair Darling in the Westminster elections of 2010. This was the Chancellor of the Exchequer who'd been responsible for the worst financial crisis, the biggest recession in 80 years. And he went round Edinburgh South West constituency, including Wester Hales and Gorgie Dalry and those Stenhouse, those big working class communities in his seat. And he basically said, I know you hate my guts. I know you hold me responsible for all this. But look at, you only get one choice. Do you want a Tory government or do you want a Labour government? And what happened? His majority went up. And I think we have to realise that argument will be proffered again by Labour. And we need to have stronger arguments to say to people, that's death by fire or death by hanging. Choose life. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's how Labour will conduct its campaign in 7 or 8 months' time.
This is what they always do. They've already started it. With the human rights thing, they've already started this week. Well, if you want your human rights, the only way out of it is to vote Labour.
Yeah, but of course, this Labour's all over the place. Ed Miliband's he's just shocking as a Labour leader. This is the same guy who says, oh, I amplify the difference between Labour and the Tories, but says we'll implement 90% of the Tories' cuts. You know, they pander to UKIP and the right on immigration and attacking welfare payments, etc., just as much as the Tories do. So, it disappoints me that the Labour Party's tactic is still so potent. I'm saying to people in the Yes campaign, we have to realise that there are still, unfortunately, people who go along with that idea that Labour is some kind of alternative to the Tories. My view is that's been hugely undermined in the course of this referendum campaign, because we've seen Labour lining up with the Tories, Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown with Cameron side by side throughout. So I think that tactic and that approach by Labour is somewhat undermined, but it will still be used. And none of these Labour MPs are pushover, they're sitting in 20,000 majority. That's why I don't believe that any of the three independence parties on their own can do it. And if the SSP and the Greens and the SNP all contest the same seat against Labour, then Labour MP is going to get back in again.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to put up the strongest candidate in each place. But just on the subject of human rights, I just want to get this in for the listeners. If you think Labour are a party of human rights, I suggest you watch the documentary that you can find on YouTube. Just type in "Taking Liberties." And it's a history of how the Labour Party, when they were last in government, systematically took away human rights themselves. And I'll post it on my site just after I've recorded this interview. So I don't know if you've seen that one.
I have seen it. I mean, the Labour Party, remember, is the Labour Party of extraordinary rendition. I mean, this week, Mozambique has just been released from Belmarsh prison in London after 9 months in jail, and they dropped all the charges. I've met Mozambique. I mean, it's an outrage what they've done to him. Mozambique went and visited his family in Pakistan. It must have been 16 or 17 years ago, because I met him when I was in the Parliament. He came and he launched a book, and he was, he was very kind with the SSP. And he went to visit his family in Pakistan. The Pakistani security services kidnapped him, handed him over to the Americans, who extraordinarily removed him to Egypt. Then they flew him back to Bagram Airport. They held him for a year. Then he went to Guantanamo Bay, and he was held there for 2 years, to eventually he was released with all the charges being dropped. I mean, this is the conduct the Labour Party, Jack Straw, Jack McConnell, all denied that Prestwick Airport and Edinburgh Airport had been used for these flights, and were lying out their back teeth. So I'm afraid the Labour Party plays fast and loose with human rights legislation. And I have to laugh at the debate in Britain, really. This is farcical. The argument that Britain is somehow some great upholder of human rights, and those dastardly Europeans are interfering with our legislation. It's the reverse. British legislation and human rights is a disgrace. I was in the Scottish Parliament when a prisoner called Napier had to go to the High Court, the Court of Session in Edinburgh, and fight for his right not to piss in a pail, because the Scottish Government had contravened human rights legislation time and time again, which says that you need what's called internal sanitation. In other words, there should have been toilets inside cells. And Jim Wallace, the Justice Minister, was fined £30 million. I mean, Scottish legislation, the Labour Party, miles behind the rest of Europe, far less, even more progressive places in the world for respecting international law and human rights legislation.
Yeah, and let's not forget Dungavel, morning raids and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a long and shocking and frankly disgusting list of breaches of human rights legislation in Britain and in Scotland also. That we're no paragons of virtue, and we've got long ways to go. If you speak to Professor Alan Miller, who's the Scottish Human Rights Commissioner, he'll give you a good idea of how far we've got to go before we live in a decent society where human rights of everybody are protected and enshrined in, let's say, a written constitution or a Bill of Rights,
And okay, and if we're still on the Labour Party, so how do you think this more powers and Gordon Brown's vows all playing out? Are you convinced it's all coming? Apparently the latest thing is sometime before 2017 we might have something.
Yeah, I wonder if Gordon Brown will even be alive by then. I mean, I've just this morning sent